Grove Unleashed.
Welcome back to another edition of Grove Unleashed. I am State Representative Seth Grove, and Anders and Charlie and Chuck aren't with us today. But it's okay. We have two awesome free market thinkers, friends of freedom, and all around wonderful Americans. We have Jonathan Williams, Vice President of ALEC and Chief Economist for the American Legislative Exchange Council. Great nonprofit. They coordinate state legislators all across the country, give them the good word of freedom and really competitiveness in other states. And sometimes we lose, sometimes we win. Sometimes they actually have an entire breakout session on how bad Pennsylvania is. I go there in shame. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for joining us.
Good to be with you, and just great to have you representing Pennsylvania on the ALEC board as well.
Yeah, and we have Nathan Benefield, local Harrisburger, has seen all the goods, bads, and horribles, atrocities of state government over the years. Nate is the Senior Vice President for Policy for Commonwealth Foundation, a great conservative think tank that helps state legislators on policy and just trying to make Pennsylvania great again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Seth. I'm glad to talk about how we can make Pennsylvania a more competitive state.
Right. So, before we get into this crazy economic data, which the BLS puts out and they refine and kind of contradicts everything we've heard from the citizens and businesses across the country, let's get into ALEC's Rich States, Poor States. You've put this out, Jonathan, for a number of years, highlighting states that are successful in their economy, they're growing, population, making good policy decisions, and then there's really bad states that really are stagnating, not growing, bad economy, and leading by bad policy decisions. So can you start us on a little bit? Why'd you do it? How long have you done it? And when will that number one state be taken out?
Well, that's a great question. Utah's been at number one for all 17 editions of Rich States, Poor States. And it was really my day one job at ALEC when I came on board in 2007. I was told we were working with these great economists, Steve Moore and Art Laffer, who I had studied for years in economics in college and just followed their work and just loved what they were doing. And so having the opportunity to jump right in and be able to create this publication from the start with them was phenomenal. I couldn't say no to the opportunity, and here we are 17 years later, traveling the 50 states multiple times over, talking about this message of what works and what doesn't. I mean, we've got these 50 laboratories of democracy. I mean, our founders were onto something pretty unique in terms of world experience, of that we wanted to empower these colonies at the time, but of course the states too. Not all good ideas come from Washington. In fact, most don't. They come from states like Utah and states all across the country doing the right thing. And so we wanted to give state legislators like yourselves and concerned citizens across the country a way to benchmark their state and say, how do we rank not just against our regional competitors, but against every state across America on key factors. And so as you know, Seth, we measure 15 different things in Rich States, Poor States, and we probably could have chosen 1,000 different things, right, frankly, to measure, because a lot of things do matter for growth and why some states succeed and some states don't. We chose the 15 of tax rates, tax burdens, regulations, labor policies, because A, Art Laffer studied this for 50 years and knows that they're some of the most important for differentiating state success versus lack of success. But then also, I think just as importantly, we see all these great ranking systems out there. U.S. News is out with their new rankings out this last week. Utah's also number one in their rankings, by the way. CNBC, we see them all over the place. But I think what makes Rich States, Poor States unique and helpful from a policymaker's perspective, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, I think you'll agree, is the fact that there are factors that you and your colleagues and colleagues all across the 50 state capitals directly control and can actually change within a relatively short amount of time and make big progress, or in some cases we've seen states move the other way that don't make a lot of progress. But it's a great way as a nonpartisan resource for everyone to say, how do you rank versus your peer states? How do you rank against states across the country? And the website, as you know, you've loved to play around with it, richstatespoorstates.org, allows you to see all 17 years of the data in one spot, and then even more importantly, click that red button that says adjust policies and say, given a magic wand, Pennsylvania, how could we get to the top 10? Or given all the bad ideas that are being talked about by some around the building, how would we potentially be in the bottom 5 against New York and New Jersey right at the bottom?
Right, and we've seen that with House Democrats in charge. Like all those data points that lead to a successful state or bad policies that lead you to economic demise, the Democrats are moving the opposite direction of reversing the score and moving Pennsylvania backwards. Now, can you go over who's the top 10 and where's Pennsylvania? And there's 2 scores, right? There's the economic outlook and then the kind of like the current economic forecast. So who's the top 10 on the outlook and where's Pennsylvania in all this?
Well, it's a good question in that the 2 different scores are the outlook, which is what we spend the most attention on, which is that 15 variables of the current policy structure in place that we think, based on the track record, leads, when you do well in those, leads to more economic success when it comes to the in-migration. As one of the key takeaways is people vote with their feet away from states that lack economic freedom and towards states that have and offer economic freedom. And then on the other side, you have the performance rank, which is the backwards looking. There's a decade's worth of data to say, here's where you've been on migration, on GDP, on several key economic factors on that. And that's a kind of a more of a backwards look, where the outlook is a forecast. Now, top 10 states and outlook, there's some really interesting stories here. Utah, as we've talked about, number 1 for all 17 years. So many good things that we could take away from Utah. We could probably have an entire episode on how do you be more like Utah to get Pennsylvania into the top 10, whether it's pension reform, the property tax guardrails that they have, the looking at federal funds in a prudent way to say these are not free funds coming from Washington. They have real costs involved, and the federal government's going to reduce aid to the states at some point. So they got ahead of so many of those things. So lots of great things from Utah, Idaho, Arizona, North Carolina, Indiana, Texas, South Dakota, Wyoming, Oklahoma, and North Dakota. Those are the top 10, and lots of great stories of those. But I mean, as you've highlighted, I know many times, a lot of these states are places where Pennsylvanians, when they leave, they're going. Correct. Because they're looking for lower taxes, more economic opportunity. So there's a lot of things we can unpack from those top 10. But the bottom line, I think, from that is, and one of the key takeaways from the 17 years of rich states, poor states, is states that tax less, spend less, and those that spend less tax less. And it's a virtuous cycle. And so many of the states are at the top do that in a predictable way, and that businesses, when they're making $1 billion new investment of a facility, they don't want the rug yanked under them and saying, hey, we just raised your taxes after you made this commitment to our state. They want predictability. Many of those states have supermajority requirements for tax increases to say, unless you get a 60% or a 2/3 majority, we're not going to raise your taxes. But it's a commitment to that free market, pro-growth approach that has kept many of these states in the top 10 for many years.
Nate, we look at the data on rich states, poor states. One good thing, highlighting Pennsylvania, we are cutting this corporate net income tax, right, from a record high 9.99. I mean, I guess thanks to New Jersey for making us number 2 because they jacked their rate up. We're a downward trajectory. The goal is to get it to 4.99 to make us competitive with other states. I think we can all agree that was a great movement. Long time coming. You've been watching the state government operate for a number of years. The Senate just moved income tax cut from 3.07 to 2.8. We don't have a progressive tax structure, which is actually really beneficial to the Commonwealth. In your view, all good. What else do we need to do to start advancing the state and bringing those people back in, making it prosperous, and really changing those net out migration demographics? And it's a power thing, right? We've lost congressional seats. We've lost power in Congress because of the policies of this state.
Yeah. Well, I think you nailed it on the head of what we need to be doing. And we're talking, I know, as chairman of the Appropriations Committee, dealing with the state budget all the time, and the governor coming with his proposal, how much are we spending, but oftentimes thinking very short term. So the governor's basically talking about what we're going to spend next year, and then don't ever worry about beyond that. But really the problems facing Pennsylvania with an aging population, more senior citizens, and that out-migration. We're losing working-age population. That is a bad trend for our state. Jonathan alluded to what states are doing to attract people. That's what we need to be focused on in Pennsylvania. What are the policies that will attract businesses, attract working-age families to move back to Pennsylvania, have a family here? And it is starting with our tax burden, I think, addressing those issues of having an uncompetitive business tax climate. I think it is our regulatory burden. We have most regulations, and even a lot of the businesses say like they're waiting years to even get approval or not getting approval. You've seen a number of cases of companies moving out, and U.S. Steel being in the news for potentially being bought out. But we've driven U.S. Steel into the ground. Like by they're building other places they can't build in Pennsylvania.
Well, they wanted to build. They wanted to expand here in Pennsylvania, but the acting Secretary of Health, she was the Allegheny Health Director, shut them down.
Yeah.
Didn't allow it. Multi-billion-dollar cost of infrastructure, jobs, good-paying jobs. Like not the $15 minimum wage that Democrats want, and like we're not focused on that. We're focused on family-sustaining jobs. Good for economy, but one bureaucrat, one county government shut them down, and now they're selling off the Japanese company.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible for our state, and that is our job climate there. And the other big issue I think to attract residents is educational choice. And we've done very well in Pennsylvania with our tax credit scholarship programs, but other states have surpassed us with universal school choice, where every student has access to funding that follows the child to the school that best fits their needs, including two of our neighbor states, Ohio and West Virginia, have universal school choice programs. There are those states that are growing, have kind of flipped the script in attracting residents. And we even looked at West Virginia with their universal school choice program. There are students living in West Virginia who are able to cross the border and attend school in Pennsylvania with the Hope Scholarship Program. That's what we need to bring to Pennsylvania.
Thank you, West Virginia. But it shows how it works. Huge shout out, by the way, to Senator Anthony Williams, Democrat from Philadelphia. The Senate moved out of their education committee a scholarship program. It was actually yesterday. Phenomenal committee speech. It is viral on all the social media. Highly recommend you listen to him. Phenomenal school choice advocate, gets it. He doesn't want his kids trapped in failing schools, and it's an economic issue, right? These kids can't go to college, or if they're in college, they're doing remediation. So if you want to deal with student debt, teach them A's and B's and how to read and write in high school. You don't have to do remediation, which means you're paying for it, right? Making sure the kids graduate in 4 years, so you don't have years 5 and 6 on a 4-year degree, which is economically just blows my mind. Like, there's nothing more frustrating than paying for a 4-year thing over 6 years. It's just bad economics, right? Adds to student debt. Those are the main cost drivers. So if K-12 got it right, these students had choices. They wanted to educate. Move them out of poverty. What's the greatest way to move an individual out of poverty? Education. There's nothing more powerful than education in a free market economy.
Yeah, and prepare them for that job. So it's a workforce development issue too for, all those shortages that small businesses, those new numbers coming out of NFIB with the optimism survey being the lowest ever recorded. Right. A lot of that is, obviously inflation and cost, but it's also lack of workforce, right? To have those educated workers coming and filling the jobs that are needed to grow Pennsylvania and other states is a huge factor. I saw Senator Williams' comments last night. First of all, great name. And, but secondly, it's such an important thing to have a bipartisan voice on this, because when you look at polling in Pennsylvania and in states across the country, it's three quarters, if not more, of the public supports empowering parents to make these important decisions for the future of their families and for their kids. It's a common sense issue. It's something that, the linkage between economic and education freedom is absolutely huge. And to drive migration patterns, as Nate was saying, it's something that West Virginia, a colleague of yours on the ALEC board, Senator Patricia Rucker, who led that effort with the Hope Scholarship Program in 2021, the first universal school choice program in America, they said it was crazy. It couldn't be done. And she took on the vested interest in a competitive district where she is in West Virginia, and the teachers' unions made her enemy number one, but she stuck to the guns because it was the right thing to do. And, guess what? It happened, and now we've seen over 10 states become universal school choice states in the last 3 years. It's a major ALEC policy education priority, and we're great to see Senator Williams go out there and talk about this as something that is good for everybody across the board.
By the way, Senator Patricia Rucker from West Virginia is Venezuelan, so she's seen the direct effect of socialism, bad economic policies, and the lack of school choice and just bad education firsthand. So what a terrific champion. Won re-election. With all that onslaught from the teachers union. So good for her, good for West Virginia. We do appreciate their tax money funding Pennsylvania schools, but we should be doing that here as well, definitely. So we also, when we talk about the economy, Jason's saying Yeah, I talk about him all the time on here. He's stealing our jobs, stealing our congressman down there in North Carolina. He's the appropriations chairman in the House, so similar. Good buddy. I enjoy our talks, and I do congratulate him on his wins, begrudgingly.
Well, you brought him up here. We did the
Right,
panel together
we
in
did.
York, right?
And
Yeah.
lo and behold, one of my businesses announced they're moving their corporate headquarters to North Carolina same day. I think it was a plan. He was up here.
The fix was in.
Yeah, the fix was in. But it shows it works. Like what we're talking about. School choice, advancing economic freedom, managing the budget, right? Simply providing predictability where businesses know we're not going to get whacked. Major major taxes. It's just a very moderated place. And that's what you see a lot of those top 10 states is well-managed, financially well-managed states. It's incredible. We can get there. A couple policy changes, we can get that. We can take out Utah.
Well, North Carolina is such a great case study for many reasons. They're number 4 this year in rich states, poor states. But if you were to go back a decade, and as Chairman Sain has said it when we did the panel together here in York even, 10 years before, North Carolina was 26th. So, I mean, thinking about how you can move Pennsylvania from the current ranking of 35th to a top-tier state, it can be done. You get the right leadership, you have the right principles, and the formula is pretty simple. And North Carolina and states like that in the top have proven it time and time again. And, Jack Kemp, the great congressman, and just a hero to many of us on the free market side of things, used to say it this way. I mean, the key to raising sustainable revenue for a state is not by raising tax rates, it's by increasing the number of taxpayers. So as hundreds of thousands of people have left Pennsylvania and other states and gone to North Carolina, guess what? Their budget is flush with cash, surplus revenue. They've been able to give teachers pay increases. I mean, just all the things across the board that lead to this virtuous cycle. And by the way, they have, as you know, the phase out in the current law, their corporate income tax will be 0 in the next 3 years.
Right.
That will be the first state in America to repeal a corporate income tax and not replace it with something else. That was done in a budget that was signed into law by a Democrat governor. So there you go, bipartisanship.
So shockingly, our CNI drawdown was also signed into law by a Democratic governor. So it must be something weird in the water. It's not normal. But one thing you hit on, and this is the main reason why I want to bring you guys in here, because NFIB is saying, their studies are showing that there's less confidence in the economy. I had the Small Business Development Center. They do they help entrepreneurs, startups. They advise and help small businesses all across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I had a discussion with them. They do regular surveys, and they said it's our number one issue for small businesses have changed. At one point, it was financing, like how do we expand and grow financing, and it switched to how do we recruit new customers and marketing. How do we get cash flow? Like how do we just sustain our business with customers? Right? I got 3 kids. You got 2 kids. You shop, right? Yes. Like my wife, all the time. Like we get 5 bags of groceries. It's like $100. I'm not talking like meat or anything. Just like little stuff for the kids, lunches throughout the week. Our normal big grocery bill was $300. It's up to above $500. Probably closing on $600 at this point. Which, by the way, if you want to make a decision on President of the United States, take your last grocery bill into the election or into the polling place with you. And if you're undecided, look at that bill and make a decision based on your grocery bill. I think it'll be helpful moving forward if you are undecided. Anyway, so and I hear from citizens, inflation's killing, things aren't good. I talk to my businesses in my district and across the state. It's not going well, right? They're feeling a crunch, but all this economic data out of Washington, D.C. says everything's great. We have a strong economy. Jobs are up, right? Growth is up. Everything's great. And then inflation just creeped back up. GDP is at 1.6%, which matches our revenues. Our actual tax growth year to date is 0.4%. Total general fund revenue is like 1.4%. So I'm not seeing strong economy. Sales tax moderating, income tax moderating. I mean, thank God for our state treasurer, Stacey Garrity. Like that's our revenue source. Her investments and the surplus of which the Democrats and the governor want to get rid of. That's our revenue source. And good or bad and different. I feel bad for the people, but inheritance tax, like people dying, has bolstered our revenues too. So treasury surplus and inheritance tax propped up our budget to date. Now refunds are up, so like our growth has, like the revenue estimate has really moderated because of that. But what are you guys seeing with this economic data? Because I'm concerned by it. Like, what is your concern by the Fed's coming out with this data? Is it real?
Well, there was a comment recently made by one of the key, drivers of economic discussion that they didn't see the stag or the inflation. You remember seeing that?
Right.
The problem is we're seeing the textbook definition of stagflation before our eyes when we see that anemic GDP number of 1.6% growth, which, by the way, when you unpack that a little bit more, it gets even worse because we should be hitting at minimum 2% GDP growth, if not 3%, to be a healthy, economy to move things forward. But we're seeing 1.6, and some estimates. My friend Brian Westbury, who's an economist who tracks this, estimates that more than 50% of that number comes from government-driven transfer payments or government-driven spending.
Wait.
So we're talking about a much worse than 1% GDP number.
Wow. So half our GDP growth is because of the federal debt, which out of control. I think we said it numerous times on this show. The IFO, our Independent Fiscal Office, their number one financial risk is the federal government because of the amount of debt. That is our GDP. Government spending from the federal government is our GDP.
Yep.
Have you seen? When's the last time that's happened in history? Do we recall?
It's unprecedented levels in our lifetimes,
Right.
anyways. You'd probably have to go back to World War II to get something
Great
comparable.
Depression, World
right?
War II, like major conflict, major economic crisis to hit that, and that is just keeping the doors open at the federal government.
That's right.
That
And
is-
of course that's the stag, but the inflation, the part of it is is even more scary because the numbers, even with all these Federal Reserve actions of raising rates to
Right.
historically high levels, at least in recent years, those have not done anything really to seem to combat inflation, where it popped back up to above 3.5%. And now there's this discussion around Washington: does the Fed even have the ability to get back to a 2% target that they've had historically, or do they need to reimagine their target and change the the goalposts on the field to say, well, maybe 3% ought to be our target, and then we're going to be closer to our target?
Well, I think they redefined recession recently too, the Biden administration, where it's normally it's two negative economic GDP numbers, and I think they just made up some new, like, it's not a recession, it's something else. What are you seeing, Nate?
Yeah, and a few things I want to talk about is what usually gets the headlines when the data comes out is
Right.
the unemployment rate, and that's like we have
Right,
one of the
yeah.
lowest unemployment rates in history. But the unemployment rate doesn't capture everything. It doesn't capture. It's only looking at the people who are working and the people who are actively looking for work.
Right.
It doesn't matter. And what we've seen is the labor force participation rate. Those who are seeking work has declined. The overall employment to population ratio has declined. Part of that is coming through the pandemic. We had all these new programs to pay people not to work,
Right.
people who were staying home. And guess what? When you pay people to stay home, they stay home.
Right.
We've seen that happen. The inflation, and this is where I think we've done polling that shows most Pennsylvanians think Bidenomics has not been good for Pennsylvania, has not been good for themselves. Pulling down, digging into the data of hourly pay, weekly pay. Hourly pay is up now, went up to $31.40 an hour. And I think I like pointing that out because we talk about the minimum wage. Like, this is the average hourly pay for everyone in Pennsylvania.
That can't be, because according to Democrats, every American's in poverty because they're only making $7.25
no one will ever pay
That's
anyone
what the government
above-
says you
yes.
have to pay.
No one will ever
that's
pay
not-
on minimum wage.
That's not true.
Yeah, that's not true.
I'm shocked.
But that increase, we have a decrease in the number of hours being worked,
Right.
weekly hours, and the weekly pay over the last 3 years under Joe Biden since January 2021 has gone up 11.9%, but inflation has gone up 19%. So workers are, while they're seeing their base pay come in higher, the cost of living has gone up, and they are actually making less, about $3,000 per year less in annual buying power. So people are unhappy because they are literally poorer than they were 3 years ago.
Oh, it's killer. So I also some economic data that came out. So like when you look at job growth, it's not full-time jobs, it's part-time jobs that are actually growing, which means the inflation is causing people to get a second, possibly a third job just to keep, because exactly what you're saying, they're poor now, so they need to have pick-up hours and increase their family income to survive. And another fascinating data point that's been out there, the Fed tracks it, is citizens in the employed and then non-citizens employed. And since the pandemic, less U.S. citizens are working, and there's an exponential increase in non-citizens working. It's going like that. Blows my mind. No one's talking about that. Like, to your point of paying Americans to not work anymore, we're seeing all that stuff.
And you still are seeing that. I mean, we've just kind of got into this point of allowing us to remove people from Medicaid who aren't eligible.
Right.
That was been in place for many years of, well, we're going to add people to Medicaid and keep them on even if their incomes exceed that. So that encourages people to stay on the government rolls. We see that, Joe Biden's talking about how great the economy is, but also we need to forgive everyone with student debt because they can't get jobs.
Right.
Like those are inconsistent points of trying to give people benefits for not working, for not earning more.
Right.
And the reality is what happens there, all of the programs we have, the war on poverty, trillions spent, that's alleviated the conditions of poverty, but it also has kept people from becoming more prosperous.
Correct. And that's the thing you need in a strong economy. You need people working. And there's tons of jobs open, great paying jobs. You talk about the skill gaps, welders. We need all those. And people just don't want to work because they don't have to. Funny thing is, if you layer all the welfare programs in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and you're smart and you maximize it, it's $80,000 a year. $80,000 a year. Right?
Yeah.
So no surprise that a lot of people don't want to work, right?
If you can stack benefits like that, phew.
And of course, the other side of that is when you tax people who work and then pay people not to work. That's the double whammy, right? And you see the proposals coming right now, more Bidenomics out of the White House, saying they want to raise taxes. They say, taxes aren't high enough, evidently, in America. I don't know. Most of the people I talk to don't feel that way. But, that seems to be whether it's capital gains tax increase that was most recently talked about, signing up U.S. companies to pay a minimum worldwide tax and kind of outsourcing our tax policy to the EU or to some international entity. It seems like a horrible idea. Right. And then, of course, as you know well, we've got the upcoming expiration of the Trump tax cuts of 2017. That is going to be, I think, the issue du jour of 2025, because by the end of 25, if nothing is done in Congress, all of those individual provisions of the Trump tax cuts of 2017, guess what? They go away.
Everybody gets a tax increase.
Automatically. Child care tax credit, the small business tax credit for those individual payers on that side, the SALT deduction, that was the subsidy to New York and New Jersey and the high tax states, that goes back to be unlimited so we can pay for their big spending ways in those states. Right. A lot of very bad things are going to happen in 25 if we don't have the right set of folks that want to extend that tax package. Because you combine that to these horrible stagflation numbers that we've been talking about, that could be absolutely catastrophic.
Right. One thing I want to head back on this economic data from the federal government is these revisions. And this is, again, not talked about a lot, but it's a big deal. So they come out with their economic data. We have this much job growth. Here's the inflation number. And then sneakily, all the prior months, they revise. And this has been an ongoing thing really since the Obama administration. Like every month, the new data comes back and they adjust the backgrounds. And it's usually not a positive adjustment. It's negative. You can talk about that a little bit.
Well, yeah, whether it's GDP, whether it's the job numbers. Almost everything, especially over the last 12 months as I've been paying more attention to it. Andy Puzder, our friend, that's been speaking in a lot of ALEC meetings, a great commentator on Fox, often, said, hey, I ought to look into this because every single month these numbers come in below. And, of course, you know how this plays out. The big headlines all over the world are, here's these positive numbers. And then when the correction happens, guess what? Nobody covers it, right? And this is how they've been able to continue what I think is kind of the economic gaslighting of the American public. First telling us there was no inflation. Remember, it was all in our minds. Then it was transitory. Right. And now, okay, well, maybe it's under control. And, I think it's just really unfortunate because it really reduces the confidence that Americans have in government statistics when they see that the games that are being played on a month-to-month basis. And it's not a one-time error. We can all forgive that. It all happens. But to have it happen every single month, basically, in recent times, there's something more to that, and I think it's really unfortunate.
Yeah, I think they're hiding stuff. They don't want to. Again, it's an election year, but the fact you can go back to the Obama administration, it's really where this data I think was really manipulated, and you see that those revisions happen in a major way.
Well, it's a good point. It's election year. Jerome Powell at the Fed is under extreme pressure right now to keep the market juiced and to not have the bottom fall out of the equities market. There's a lot of potential negatives there. I mean, you saw the corrections that we've seen in recent weeks when there's been now the expectations there won't be a rate cut for interest rates with that cost of capital. I mean, if we don't see good earnings and profitability coming out of companies here in the coming months and there's no rate reduction, I don't know. The market seems a little overvalued if we don't see some sort of correction on profits or rates.
And you see it concentrated. There's a lot of similarities between the market now and during the Great Depression. You see the bubble building. It's just a matter of time until it hit. Like I guess typically it's like every decade or something we have a recession. Like we're overdue. Like it could be really bad. I don't know where the bottom's going to be, but it has a potential of being like really, really, really bad. Hopefully we don't hit it. Other thing you hit on, Jonathan, is this new monetary policy by the Fed. So I got my master's degree, public financial management from Kentucky. I had this class on monetary policy. And your typical Fed policy, right? It's the Fed manages the monetary policy by raising rates. You want to fight inflation, you raise the rates. If you want to crank up the economy, you drop the rates. That's the normal, right? But Yellen's doing a new economic approach, and I learned about this in class, and it blew my mind. It still blows my mind. I told my district office staffer, John Popovich, and he freaked out. Like for a month, he's like, "I can't believe they're doing this. This can't work." Like. But this is what it's called: modern money theory, right? It's very scary. Fed, the only thing, and I think this is where they're trapped. And I think Yellen and Biden trapped the Fed into this, and they can't get their way out of it. So, modern money theory is basically your national governments who can print money. That's their revenue source. Taxes are no longer a revenue source. So you just debt spend because it doesn't matter because you can print money. Taxes are used as a new monetary policy to fight inflation. So if you want to reduce inflation, you raise taxes. If you have too high of inflation when it drop, you put money back in the economy, so you cut taxes. Obviously, it can't work long term because we're seeing what's happening, right? They're just debt spending. The debt payments are high. The interest rates are high. People will stop buying it. It's a cycle crash, right? I think that's where they're at, because if I'm looking at the Inflation Reduction Act, right, it was supposed to reduce inflation. It was about tax policy. And I think that's what they're hiding from the American people, that the Biden administration is practicing modern money theory to do monetary policy through the executive branch and ignore Powell and the Fed because they can't control it anymore because it's now a tax policy adjustment versus the inflation rate. And I think that is in conflict. And I think that's why you have some frustration with Fed and Powell saying we have to divide because there's nothing they can do. But it requires the federal government to raise your taxes to pull money out of the economy, because it's basically what inflation is: too much money in the economy, too little goods and services and stuff. So I think that's their plan for the Trump tax cuts. By getting rid of them, they win on modern money theory. That tax, and they don't have to raise the tax, they just let it expire. They suck all that money back into the federal government, which is a scary thought. And it doesn't work. Like, modern money theory will not work. It does not work. It's scary. It freaked me out when I heard about it. We had to write a paper on it. I was like, this is the worst thing in the world. The professor actually liked it. I got an A on it, surprisingly. But it's a scary thing. I don't know how you sustain it at the federal government with two conflicting policies, one of which is, I think, a fictitious plan that has been devastating. That's the Biden economy, modern money theory.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically economic malpractice in definition, right? There's no way it works. And, you see these ridiculous ideas from people like AOC saying we're just going to mint trillion-dollar coins and we're going to pay off the national debt that way. I mean, it's essentially, that. And then your point on tax policy is exactly, I think, where they're headed as well. Now, a couple of different things on this outside of just the insanity of the sheer idea. I mean, I always say D.C. is the land of make-believe, and this gives it all the more credence that it is the land of make-believe when you come up with ideas like that. But the thing that we have to worry about, obviously, is what happens to the U.S. dollar in these scenarios, right? Because, I mean, the way that we've been able to actually not have a sovereign debt crisis, which I actually fear, if the housing crisis was the big recession from last decade, a government sovereign debt crisis a la Greece or other countries hasn't happened in the United States, even if we press the limits on debt to GDP ratio way over 100% now, and other things that other countries couldn't get away with. The reason, of course, or one of the reasons that is we're the world's reserve currency. People trust the dollar. There's an expectation that there's going to be a store of value there, and that's why so many international investors continue to pour money into the dollar, because we're, let's say, less bad than so many of the other currencies that are out there. But, in a scenario where you have, let's say, a lot of adversaries in the United States, and the BRICS, for instance, held the summit to say, how do we dethrone the dollar? China and Russia don't really like having dollar-denominated international exchange where they have sanctions that take a major hit on those countries because things are denominated in a dollar world. What happens if that's not the case? Not only from a national security perspective, which is really scary these days, seeing what we're seeing around the world, but then what happens to all of our holdings in dollars? I mean, there's the rise of cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin and gold-denominated, backed things to say, hey, if we go to the extreme here on modern monetary theory and inflate and basically debase the dollar, I mean, talk about potentially a catastrophic outcome for the United States and anybody that holds dollar-denominated assets. I mean, that would be it right there. And the way that we would get to such a scenario is keep racking up the credit card, doing what we're doing. Debt will be, $40 or $50 trillion very quickly, continuing the pace that we're at. Right. And then we use this to debase the currency on modern monetary theory. I mean, that would be the way to dethrone the dollar. And we would do it from within, unfortunately. Right. It wouldn't be a foreign adversary. We'd be doing it to ourselves.
It's not like we haven't done it to the United Kingdom when we went to the gold standard from the silver standard and then gold standard to the U.S. dollar. It's scary.
Yeah, I want to be a little optimistic because I feel like modern monetary theory has cooled a little bit from where it was 2 years ago, because all of these folks were 2 years ago saying deficits don't matter. You deficit hawks. Right. Like, say this is going to lead to inflation. It won't. And then we ended up printing all this money. That's what fueled the federal spending when they had all this new money coming in. It was not money they were borrowing. It was not money they were raising in taxes. It was the Federal Reserve printing money to fund federal spending. And that clearly led to massive inflation. And people got that. And people woke up. I feel that has cooled a little bit the push for the modern monetary theory. But we have to continue vigilant on that. And I see President Biden, I see Senator Bob Casey saying, well, all this inflation is corporate greed. It's greedflation, shrinkflation, it's corporations. And you have to believe that. You have to believe, you know what, for 40 years, all these corporations got together and said, hey, let's keep inflation low. Let's keep our prices low. And then suddenly, you know what? Let's get Biden by raising prices across the board in every single sector of the economy. No, that's not what caused inflation. It was the monetary policy caused by federal spending. And I've written about this. It's the spending stupid. Right. It's the policies that are driving the cost of living up, and that has to stop. And we need to learn that lesson. And
let's be honest. What's shrinkflation? It is corporations trying to keep their product at a certain price point for consumers. That is a consumer-friendly policy that they do, because if you have a 20-ounce bag of chips that now costs higher because of inflation, because of the manufacturing process, wages, trying to find people to just work at a higher wage, like there's a lot of price compression in that manufacturing process that increases price. So if you're looking at your price point for which consumers buy those goods, if you want to keep it at that same price, you have to put less product in the bag. That's just simple economics. And they want to be like, oh, it's corporate greed that's driving it. It's a pro-consumer policy, so they hit that little benchmark of where consumers are actually purchase that product and not say, I'm going to pass on that.
Yeah, shrinkflation is inflation because your dollar is less valuable, so you're going to get less product for that dollar. That's simply what it is, and that's the result of the policies coming from the federal government.
Right. On an optimistic note, because I am an optimist, I know I sound a little doom and gloom because of all these bad ideas we've been talking about here at the federal level. But, one thing that, if inflation is too many dollars chasing too few goods, right, the classic definition that you mentioned, there's another way out of this that nobody is really talking about, but there's a clear playbook that Reagan, led with, right? And that is the issue there is we need to basically either kill the economy through higher rates, which is the approach, the painful approach, and make, mortgages at, 8% now again, and small business lending, and one of the reasons why optimism is so low. Or you can take the Reagan, Volcker, Steve Forbes approach of let's enhance productivity in the United States. And how do you do that? Through the supply side way that was proven, by the way, when we had some of the highest tax rates in the world before Reagan, it cut them down to size and actually got the American economy moving again. We did it through a combination of deregulation, pro-energy policy, stopping this ridiculous war on energy that we face through ESG and some of the other tools that are out there. That is a deflationary measure that boosts productivity. But actually then the reverse of this, modern monetary theory, which is actually cut taxes on productivity and give people more of their own hard-earned dollars back, whether it's businesses or individuals. That's the way to do it. Extend the Trump tax cuts, stop this war on energy, and unleash American productivity. That's the way to tackle inflation.
Right. Amen. Right. It's worked. We've seen it work. We've seen it work with the Trump tax cuts. Strongest economy we've ever seen. Revenues increasing at the federal level. We know it works. We've seen it in states. And going back to where we started, right? Rich states, poor states. They do it right. One thing I want to hit on, because I know the worry of the federal government. Our budget's about $45 billion this year. We have about $45 billion we get from the federal government. So, when the IFO says the federal government is our greatest financial risk, if we lose those dollars, you have a massive hole. And that's your entitlement programs, right? The most vulnerable, seniors in the senior, that's a huge problem for every state moving forward. So this is not a worry that is one-off and we're a state and we're fine. It has a direct effect on us and the citizens we represent, because we're state governments, we're in between the federal government, local government, right? You got to know what's happening here, you got to know what's happening here, and then you have the entire state to worry about. It's a great concern to me. And you're looking at your budgets it's a rare that states reduce expenditures, but we haven't seen that kind of defunding from the federal side, which hasn't happened yet, but there is a potential risk of that.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we've gone the other way of trying to, oftentimes the federal program is that, will reward us for spending more at the state level, so we'll spend more at the state level to get more free money from Washington, D.C. But that is a huge problem in terms of how we balance our budget. It also is what we really need, and ask for is the federal government to give us more flexibility, especially on our human services, our welfare, Medicaid programs. Just give us a block grant. Let the state design the program that best fits their needs, so that we're not driving up those costs every year. That's what Washington should do and empower the states. And so, as Jonathan alluded to, the states that are the best, that are the best policies, are going to lead the way and innovate. And that's what we've seen for many years of the great innovations, the great policies coming out of the states, not out of D.C. It's the states that are leading the way and making our country more competitive and more prosperous.
Yeah, there's some good things the federal government should focus on. There's other things. Let us do it. We know best. Well, gentlemen, this has been very enlightening. Thank you so much for going through rich states, poor states, what we can do better as a Commonwealth to be successful for the citizens in the state, for prosperity, to advance school choice, to protect those kids, and really advance proven policies that really benefit everyone, every walk of life. Benefits from these policies we discussed today. And then obviously going into the crazy economic data, it's eye-opening, a little scary, but hopefully help is on the way. And I'll end with this, elections matter. Both smart. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Grove Unleashed.